Hello, everyone. Welcome to our fifth installment of our digital series on sustainability. My name is John Miller, president of Muskoka Steamships and Discovery Center. We're a registered charitable organization located at the Muskoka Wharf in Gravenhurst, Ontario. Before we begin this evening's speaker series, I'd like to acknowledge the First Peoples, who for thousands of years before us were and are still the keepers and caretakers of this land where we now live and work. We are dedicated to honoring the Indigenous history and culture and committed to moving forward with the spirit of reconciliation and respect with all First Nations, Métis, and Inuit people. And in particular for Muskoka, all four cultures, the Anishinaabe, Haudenosaunee, Huron-Wendat, and Métis that inhabited these lands either currently or historically. We recognize all the generations of Indigenous people and their historic connection to this place. And we are grateful for the opportunity to gather here at this time. So again, thank you for joining us. Sorry we had a bit of a delay at the beginning, but we're ready to go now. I'm going to give you a few slides about our organization, our sustainability, and our new project at the Muskoka Discovery Center. So we adopted sustainability as a core theme over a year ago as another step in our evolution to develop a vibrant cultural hub for the District of Muskoka. We adopted the slogan, Love Muskoka, Sustain Muskoka, discover ways to make a difference as a branding statement for our sustainability initiative. Our goal is to become the physical and digital presence for community organizations and partners to encourage the will to act against climate change. Also, to assist Muskoka residents and the visitors annually to the Muskoka Steamships and the Muskoka Discovery Center discover how they too can make a difference through small actions of their own. Our project began in 2017, and it's now a $7.4 million revitalization to increase the relevance of the Muskoka Discovery Center to the Muskoka region and improve our financial sustainability by broadening our audiences. We're a cultural hub and learning center, and we're adding 5 new permanent exhibits, 4 of them in our 12,000 square foot edition that you see on the screen. So those exhibits are as follows: A Landscape of Nations, Non-Indigenous Culture and History of Muskoka for the past 200 years. The Transformative Steam Era, the disruptive steam technology that changed the world and brought the world to Muskoka. Miskouaki, Confluence of Cultures. This will be a feature exhibit in our revitalization and our expansion, and it's about the Indigenous presence in Muskoka for over 13,000 years. Love Muskoka, Sustain Muskoka. Well, that's why we're here tonight, all about sustainability. And Wanda 3. Wanda's our 94-foot long classic steam yacht, built in 1915 for Mrs. Timothy Eaton. Our goal is to electrify Wanda and relaunch her on the Muskoka Lakes in 2022 for everyone to enjoy. So those exhibits, those new exhibits join our most recent exhibits that we added to the Muskoka Discovery Center. They are as follows: Watershed Wonders, everything that you want to know about the Muskoka River watershed, and we opened that in 2018. And Water is Life, Indigenous beliefs about water and a celebration of the water keepers. And that exhibit opened in 2020 in the middle of COVID last summer. Those 2 exhibits make up our water gallery, which is really our first foray into our environmental sustainability theme. Also on your screen, you'll see the cover of our latest magazine, Muskoka Reflections. We publish this magazine 3 times a year. We have a distribution of over 25,000 people. This particular edition has been printed and circulated to our membership just recently. It's probably still in the mail if you haven't received it yet. The birch bark canoe in the foreground is representative of Miskouaki, and in the background you see the Royal Mail ship Seguin and the Winona II waiting patiently for their chance to sail again on the Muskoka Lakes. So please welcome Kevin Boyle, Climate Change Coordinator for the District of Muskoka and our moderator for the series, to introduce tonight's speakers. Kevin, over to you.
Hi, John. Well, thanks very much. And as John mentioned, I'm Kevin Boyle, and I'm the Climate Change Initiative Coordinator from the District Municipality of Muskoka. And we're proud to partner with the Muskoka Steamships and Discovery Center and our other partner organizations to bring forth this series. So first, we'll start with a little bit of housekeeping. So questions. In the bottom of your screen, you'll see beside the chat box a Q&A button. That's where you can ask your questions. We have everyone on mute and there's no ability to unmute. But there you'll be able to type in your questions and also to vote up questions that you want to hear answered. And this helps reduce the duplication of the same types of questions. So you see something in there, make sure you give them a quick read. And if you see something in there, you can thumbs up or like it, and it'll move up to the top of the list, and we'll make sure that we get to them in order. But I also found that the timing of this evening's speaker series really couldn't be better. On Monday, the District Council unanimously passed our District Land Acknowledgements Guidelines and Framework that was developed by or through the Muskoka Area Indigenous Leadership Table. As a part of that group, the Muskoka Area Indigenous Tables, a land acknowledgement working group was coordinated with the District of Muskoka and our area municipalities, and spent several months in 2019 and 20 developing the guidance with input from members of our local Indigenous communities that have historical or current interest in Muskoka, including the Huron-Wendat Nation, the Moon River Métis Council, the Moose Deer Point First Nation, Chippewas of Ramit First Nation, the Wata Mohawks First Nation, and Wiskoking First Nation, who continue to be consulted as this document evolves. This is another step as the district works towards reconciliation and strengthening our relationship with our Indigenous partners. So today we are very proud to present Tim Johnson and Larry McDermott. Tim Johnson is here to talk about the Steamship and Discovery Center's Misko-Aki permanent exhibit. And Larry McDermott here is to present on Indigenous perspectives, reconnecting with the natural world. So Tim Johnson is a conceptual author and executive producer of the Sundance Film Festival, Hot Docs, and Canadian Academy of Cinema and Television Award winning documentary, Rumble, The Indians Who Rocked the World. He's an experienced education, museum, and arts executive who recently helped lead the development of 2 public memorials of national significance that recognize and honor Indigenous peoples' contributions to Canada. The first, A Landscape of a Nation, the Six Nations and Native Allies Commemorative Memorial, was established in the Queenston's Height Park. And the second, the First Nation Peace Monument, was designed by world-renowned architect Douglas Cardinal and was established in the Deque House Heritage Park in Thorold. As a former associate director of the museum programs at the Smithsonian Institute's National Museum of the American Indian, Tim managed the museum's largest organizational group across its facilities in Washington and New York. A long list of critically acclaimed exhibits and programs were produced during his tenure, creating an area that significantly advanced the institution's museology and reputation. Active in his home community of Six Nations of the Grand River and with several prestigious educations, art, and journalism institutions over more than 37 years, Tim received the Dreamcatcher Foundation Award for Art and Culture in 2016. Joining Tim is Larry McDermott, who's to talk about Indigenous perspectives reconnecting with the natural world. Larry McDermott is a member of the Shabbat Abidjawan First Nation, and I do apologize, Larry, we just went over that, I'm sorry. He served on the Ontario Species at Risk Public Advisory Committee as the Aboriginal member of the Ontario American Eel Recovery Strategy. He's also a member of the Ontario Natural Resources Aboriginal Traditional Knowledge Working Group, served as a supporting elder on the National Advisory Panel under Pathway 1 for Protected Areas, and is a member of the Ontario Professional Forest Association Council as an appointed public member. He has also served on the Canadian Commission for UNESCO's Sectoral Commission for Natural, Social, and Human Sciences and Special Advisor to the CONUSCO Secretary General on Reconciliation. Larry was one of 2 Aboriginal members on the Ontario Human Rights Commission from 2009 until 2016. He's a member of the International Indigenous Forum on Biodiversity. He's also written in the IUCN publication Policy Matters on the subject of Indigenous law and advocates for the reconciliation of Western and Indigenous legal systems. He's a member of the Indigenous Elders Council and the Indigenous Advisory Group of Law Society of Ontario. He's been appointed an honorary doctorate of laws from the University of Guelph. Larry is currently the executive director of Plenty Canada, an Indigenous nonprofit organization dedicated to sharing of Indigenous knowledge and Western science for environmental protection, sustainable development, and healthy communities. And without further ado, I'll turn it first over to Tim Johnson for his discussion. Thanks very much. To you, Tim.
Thanks a lot, Kevin. Appreciate it. And very happy to be here with everybody tonight and to talk a little bit about the work that we're doing toward that expansion that was described early in the presentation by John. And it's really what the Muskoka Steamships and Discovery Center is doing is really exciting and really absolutely incredible for the region, and the efforts that they've been putting toward this in terms of reconciliation with Indigenous peoples, I think is really admirable and very, very important. So, you know, we're really into the 6th year after the Canada's Truth and Reconciliation Commission released its report and 94 calls to action. And responding to that, the Discovery Center, with the support of its membership and the board of directors, the town of Gravenhurst, district municipality of Muskoka, embarked on an unprecedented initiative to develop an exhibition intended to convey the historical and contemporary experiences and cultural insights of Indigenous peoples who have inhabited and traversed the region for millennia. So the leadership of the center got in touch probably a little less than a year ago now, and we embarked on a program to develop an interpretive plan for what the Indigenous exhibition might look like. And through that process, we came up with a working title that we have right now, which you've heard a few times already tonight, Muskoka, Confluence of Cultures. And so Muskoka in the Anishinaabe-Moan language means red earth, and confluence of cultures because the history of the Muskoka region resonates with Indigenous peoples, a gathering point for several Indigenous peoples who've either traversed or inhabited the lands of the Muskoka region over millennia, and the waterways that move in and out from that region. Those were the transportation routes. And so Muskoka is a very important region, certainly within Ontario, and I would say within all of Canada. So the exhibition, which will be on the 2nd floor of that extension that you see, which by the way is absolutely gorgeous. And I think once everything is complete and all the exhibitions are installed there, the visitors are going to really, really enjoy it. But the exhibition dedicated to Indigenous history and culture is 3,000 square feet on the 2nd floor. And we're really looking at Indigenous history extending back to the Ice Age as it retreated right up to the present time, and trying to convey that history within that space. As the previous presenters mentioned, there are several folks who, several Indigenous peoples who've been through the area. Obviously the Huron-Wendat early on, Anishinaabeg peoples, Haudenosaunee peoples came up for a while, and with the arrival of the Wata Mohawks are still there, and of course the Métis as well. So part of our process has been to pull together representatives from each of these nations, communities, some of which are no longer in the area, but still have important roots and histories in the area. So we've been workshopping through all of that content to provide a meaningful experience for the visitors. And so what we came up with, just to give you some insight, and mind you, this exhibition won't be actually open to the public for at least another 1.5 years or more. But we'll be taking visitors on a canoe journey through history up to the present, and then looking towards the future and applying some of these Indigenous philosophies around sustainability, showcasing some of that work, some of those philosophies and values throughout time, and then seeing how those can be applied by everyone who inhabits Muskoka today. So it's been a very rich and full process that we've been engaged with. And I think what I can do here is maybe grab the screen and just give you a couple of examples of illustrations that we've prepared. So hopefully you can see this, and this is sort of the entrance experience when you arrive at the exhibition. You'll see the staircase on the left, and that's the primary entrance into this exhibition from the exhibit floor below. And when you come in, you'll have some introductory elements here that talk about the indigenous peoples who have inhabited the region, and we're looking at sort of like these interesting creative conventions to convey that. So most of the indigenous peoples who were here, they all had clans, clan families associated with plant, or not plants so much, but animals, and also other elements within the Muskoka environment. And so there is some interrelational material and connections between the cultures that we want to start by showcasing. One of those is it's called the dish with one spoon agreement. And so what you see here is a large dish. Now there's many spoons there that we thought maybe we'd do something where we're talking about the different clans and so forth. But the idea of the symbolism of a dish with one spoon is about how the lands were shared initially by the indigenous peoples who traversed and inhabited that particular region. So the early agreements between indigenous peoples saw the lands as shared resources and so forth, and they had a philosophy behind how they would manage their relations moving forward. Now that got much more complicated when Europeans arrived, and there became competitions for trade goods, the beaver trades, for example, and that began to create and exacerbate more problems between the indigenous peoples themselves. So even within our process, it's been interesting to bring all of these cultural groups back together and actually look objectively at that history and think about how it is that we're going to actually inform the visitors about this complex history as they go through the exhibition. So I had mentioned that this idea of a canoe trip through several different landing areas where you'll learn something about the history and or locations of Muskoka through this exhibit. So you'll see a birch bark canoe in the upper left of this image here. And then on the floor, there'll be this sort of stream that will help guide the visitors in terms of wayfinding through the exhibition. Now, the building has these beautiful laminate wood beams, absolutely gorgeous. And so our design team is looking at how to use those beams because they're already there within the architectural plan, and use those to good effect in separating these spaces for content. So this gives you an idea of what that experience will be when you first arrive. And then this is just one of the imagined landing areas where we talk about Anishinaabe peoples. And so this plinth here, or display case, it's almost like as you're coming down the river, these almost serve as organic features or forms like islands. And then content will be populated within these islands and also on the walls. So in this respect, we're going to take visitors through this journey and do our best to convey this really complex and rich history, indigenous history of the Muskoka area. So that gives you at least a little bit of a visual sort of understanding of where we're headed with this. Now, mind you, we're in phase 2 of the research part of this project, where we're making the final determinations about the content that's going to go into every area within the exhibition. And so I don't want to give away much more than that. There's all kinds of things that are happening with it. Very, very exciting, and we're delighted actually to be working with the folks at the Muskoka Steamships and Discovering Center. It's been a phenomenal collaboration thus far, and it's exactly what institutions like this and communities like Gravenhurst and Muskoka ought to be doing in terms of rebuilding or strengthening relations with Indigenous peoples in accordance with Canada's mandate on truth and reconciliation. So we're absolutely delighted to be working on this project. You know, and of course it's Muskoka, so it's great. So at this point, it's my role to segue over to Larry. Kevin has already given a rather robust introduction of Larry McDermott. I'll just add that I've known Larry since the early 1990s, and I was working with him at Plenty Canada on a number of communication strategies and projects for the organization, and we've stayed in touch all these years. I've always said to Larry that working at Plenty Canada was one of the favorite things I've ever done, including that of the Smithsonian Institution, Cornell University, and other institutions. There's a quality to the work that, and a heart to the work that Plenty Canada does as an organization in terms of its interest in assisting, aiding, and supporting Indigenous peoples. And I was with Larry when the organization was making that full turn towards really focusing almost exclusively on Indigenous communities within Canada, but not just within Canada, but also in other parts of the world, in the Caribbean, the Taino people and communities, in Guatemala with the Mayan communities, in Peru now with the Quechua communities. And then, of course, we had several projects going in Southern Africa as well, with the Indigenous peoples of Botswana, South Africa, and in that Southern African area. So the organization's been doing really great work for a long, long time. And I just want to say I'm really pleased to be able to welcome Larry tonight. And he's really the star of this show. And he's going to give us a good presentation on sustainability, informing us of many of the international conventions, national conventions, and policies that are important to the work, and to basically serve as a foundation for the work that Plenty Canada does. So I'll turn it over to my good friend and colleague, Larry McDermott.
Thank you, Tim, and thank you for those kind words. It's a pleasure to have worked with you, Tim, for all these years, and a pleasure to have the opportunity to share in tonight's event. If you'll allow, I'm going to speak a few words in my language. Kwekwe Kakina, Kwe Kichimanadu Uamsi, Indigenous Cosmakwa and Dodem, Shabata Bajwan First Nation and Digiba. So just a quick introduction in my language, and part of the process of reflecting on Indigenous perspectives and tonight's theme, reconnecting with the natural world, is that our languages are full of verbs, action, and so that idea of connecting is so important. Earlier this afternoon, I was co-teaching a Master's in Conservation Leadership course, and we were reflecting on various literature sources that my colleague and I had recommended. And it was interesting. We have two Indigenous students, and the balance are non-Indigenous. But interesting, through that literature, they're looking at Indigenous knowledge systems and Western science. And someone that Tim and I both know, Robin Wall Kimmerer, who wrote a book, Braiding Sweetgrass, that has become a New York Times bestseller, speaks of the knowledge systems, and she's a botanist. She talks about Western science being very strong on the mental and physical, but that indigenous knowledge systems bring in the empathic, or that heart connection, and spiritual connection in terms of the energy in all things. So we'll talk a little bit about that. I'm gonna start. Given the beautiful museum that you've created, I'm sure you'll have an appetite for a very quick history lesson. But all of this leads us to reconnecting to the natural world, and how that was the intention in terms of creating this country we know as Canada. So within Canada's Constitution, recognition of the Royal Proclamation issued by King George III in 1763 is critically important, because it was that proclamation that led to a process for sharing the land, a treaty that's some refer to it as the Magna Carta. Not only Indigenous perspectives and rights, but of how we were meant to share the land. And in fact, Algonquin and Nipissing runners went with wampum. This is Quahog shells, a mechanism of communication. I'll leave that for now. I'm going to elaborate a little bit. So they went to a number of First Nations. 24 of those First Nations responded, and some of them took 3 months to get to Niagara in the summer of 1764. I should have mentioned the Algonquin and Nipissing runners went to those First Nations in the winter of 1763 and 1764, preparing those First Nations for that treaty event. And so between 2,000 and 2,500 chiefs from those nations came together. There would have been a great deal of preparation, communication with the community, focusing on what were the priority issues that those chiefs were to communicate. And at Niagara, representing the British, was Sir William Johnson, who had 8 children with Molly Brant, a Mohawk clan mother. And he knew both Haudenosaunee and Anishinaabeg ceremonies. He knew oral traditions, and as well as the written word, of course, and prepared accordingly. Also, in preparing for the treaty, there were a number of instances in which the British Crown communicated their acknowledgement of Indigenous sovereignty and agency. And so essentially, people came together as equals. And what Indigenous peoples had that was critically important as part of their individual Indigenous legal systems, but a common denominator was respect for natural law. And the intention was that Indigenous peoples, because of our long-standing relationship with the land, thousands of years, had knowledge and agency that comes from the land. And and it also came for that respect for natural law. And what I think I'll do is I'm going to share something that was said by Faithkeeper Oren Lyon to the Royal Commission on Aboriginal Peoples back in 1993. And he explained natural law this way. And when I read it, I also think of my esteemed Algonquin elder, William Commando, who had very similar things to say. Anyway, Orrin said this: Indians are spiritual, religious people, always have been, and hopefully always will be, because that is the fundamental law. That's the main law of survival. That is the law of regeneration. Any law that you make, you must bind to that spiritual law. If you don't, you're not going to make it, because the spiritual law, the law of reality that is outside here, that says you must drink water to live, that you must eat to survive, that you must build shelter for your children, that you must plant, you must harvest, you must work with the seasons. That law does not change. That's the major law that governs all life on this earth. If nations don't make their law accordingly, they will fail eventually, because no human being is capable of changing that particular law. And so that was part of that understanding of natural law, was part of the agreement to share the land we now know as Canada. It was also part of the incredible loyalty that Indigenous peoples had in defending what was the British colony from invasion from the South, from the Americans. And then in 1815, at the Treaty of Ghent, Article 9 recognized the Treaty of Niagara and subsequent treaties. However, there wasn't an enforcement mechanism, and things went downhill from there. And of course, it includes things like the Indian Act, residential schools, and all those things that led to the Truth and Reconciliation Commission and the 94 calls to action that Tim referenced earlier. Where I want to re-enter the historical chronology is in 1992, as a result of a number of events, including the Norwegian Premier Gro Brundtland's paper Limits to Growth. And in 1992, in Rio de Janeiro in Brazil, led largely by Canadian efforts. Maurice Strong was a Canadian, was the lead for the UN, and leaders came from all over the world. I had the great good fortune of being part of the Indigenous delegation from Canada and attending the summit, and also meeting people from all over the world, including people from throughout the political spectrum in Canada. I remember, yeah, I have fond memories of those meetings, but I better sail past. So out of that summit, birthing of the 3 conventions on climate change, biodiversity, and desertification, which some people confuse with sand dunes and don't realize that it's actually referring to the loss of topsoil in the world. And since 1970, we've lost almost 25% of our topsoil. Clearly an unsustainable way of living upon this earth. If you think about natural law again, the reason that we are having that those conventions were needed at all was because the way we were living on this earth was clearly unsustainable. And at that convention, one of the key knowledge systems that was recognized was or is the knowledge system of Indigenous peoples. And a facility called 8J was established to help Indigenous knowledge keepers bring their knowledge forward and influence policy. But that process has been very, very slow. In 2010 in Nagoya, Japan, the current targets were created, what are known as, or at least I pronounce them, Aichi Targets. It's AICHI. There are 20 targets and there are 4 goals. Among the 20 targets includes Aichi Target 18, which is the knowledge of Indigenous peoples and the commitment that where Indigenous peoples wish to participate in the efforts to arrest the decline of biodiversity, that they be welcomed. Another of those targets is Aichi Target 11, which is the expansion of protected areas, a methodology for trying to protect biodiversity. And at that time, I believe the goal was in 2010, I believe it was 11%. The world agreed to a goal of 17% by 2020. And since what will be discussed in China right now, scheduled for October, was supposed to have happened last year, but we all know COVID stopped a lot of things. So in China, it looks like the world is going to agree to expand those targets. And I should have been clear, 17% protection of terrestrial or land-based lands and fresh water. And there are separate goals for the oceans. But so on the terrestrial freshwater goals are expected to be increased to 25% in 2025 and 30% in 2030. Very ambitious targets. And of course, it was easier to get to even 17% than it will be to 25, much less 30. One of the key methodologies in Canada for achieving that is Indigenous protected and conserved areas, but I'll come back to that. So Canada decided it set its 2020 goals and also established a process for making recommendations to achieve those goals. What was unique and what was a case of borrowing the old to achieve the new goals was to look at Canada's origin story, to look at the proclamation of 1763, the Treaty of Niagara, those essential principles that were part of establishing our relationship and caring for the land. And so the co-chair of the process for achieving Canada's 2020 vision was called Pathways 1. The co-chair, along with Canada, was actually Alberta. And Shannon Phillips, the Minister of Environment there, co-chaired with Catherine McKenna, who was then the Minister of Environment, now Infrastructure. Shannon Phillips had a good relationship with elders in Alberta, and in particular, Dr. Reg Crowshoe. And Dr. Reg Crowshoe influenced the process to include a new methodology for establishing those recommendations. That methodology is called ethical space. It's a term coined by Cree elder from the University of Saskatchewan, Willie Ehrman. So I'll explain ethical space in a minute here, but also there was a shared governance model. So to manage the steering committee representing the territories, provinces, and the feds, and the knowledge committees, the Indigenous Circle of Experts, and the National Advisory Panel that represented mining, forestry, and agriculture, as well as environmental NGOs, some Indigenous, and a few other representations existed there. And so the governance model made accommodation for Indigenous knowledge systems, as well as Western science and Western culture. That meant that things like the gavel was the parallel, was the smudge. And then Robert's Rules of Order, the parallel in this particular model was those 7 gifts, or sometimes referred to as grandfather teachings. We opened just like the process at the Treaty of Niagara was opened in pipe ceremony. And when we passed over the reports from the Indigenous Circle of Experts, which, by the way, was We Rise Together, and from the National Advisory Panel is Canada's Conservation Vision. Ultimately, the governments, so all of them, responded with One with Nature. I highly recommend it. I actually make I've created a few pages that I recommend that all who share this land spend a half hour to an hour reading a few of the core pages. Ethical Space from One with Nature, the first recommendation and the diagram that exists in the middle of Canada's Conservation Vision, and a few pages from We Rise Together. So in transferring those reports, they were wrapped in prayer cloth, they were smudged. There was drum songs were sang. Those drum songs articulate honor songs and responsibilities to the land, and also express our empathy, our gratitude for all the life givers, all the plants and animals who have shared this land for thousands of years, in most cases, with us, and have been there. And in that natural law relationship, that law that in my language I refer to as Jinaway Deganuk, that all of life is connected. And by the way, our board president, a lawyer, and I created a paper on the importance of bringing those legal systems together, and that when you honor Indigenous rights, you actually produce better results when it comes to biodiversity and conservation. And so that's a key theme, both in terms of that process. And we opened every meeting with smudge, and we closed it with a smudge. And I know in the with the National Advisory Panel, which included those reps from, like I said, mining, forestry, and agriculture, in the debriefing, it was recognized as one of the most important parts of our deliberations, just to pause, to bring those medicines from the land, and just to purify our space, connect us with the land, and bring us outside of that sterile environment that we often find ourselves in, where we talk about life, but there's very little life around us. So certainly in those processes, both of those committees traveled around Canada, met with elders, spent time on the land, and made sure that there were processes for making the connection to the land. And when we connect with the land, when we pause, I know I like to, when I go to the bush, if I'm going to harvest firewood or anything, to sit on a stump and just reflect on the life around me, to actually ask to join, to express my intention, which is to first of all respect the life that's there, to take only what I need for my family's needs, and to express my gratitude for the fact that that those other species are there. That's reflected in Canada's Conservation Vision, again from NAP, and I'm still amazed. But if you go to the very first recommendation, if you look at the second and third bullet, you'll, of that first recommendation, you will see things, and I'm going to have to paraphrase a little bit, although I have it right here, that we are one species among many who share this land. So there's the recommendations to accept the Indigenous worldview that we are one species among many who share the land. And the third bullet is that in achieving our conservation goals together, we'll do so through a spirit of reconciliation. And so when I look at things like the Truth and Reconciliation 94 calls, you'll see either directly or indirectly reflections on the relationship to the land, Indigenous worldviews, and the importance of integrating them. The TRC reflects on not only governments, but civil society, and talks about all of civil society. Adopting the principles, and those 10 principles in the front of the 94 calls are very important. There's a little booklet put out by the National Center for Truth and Reconciliation. And within it, and I'll just hold it up, it's a little booklet, but this thing is packed. You also have the United Nations Declaration of Indigenous Peoples in here too. It's a great little document. So in wrapping things up, the lesson learned in Pathways 1 was that we can work together, that and that we have to work together, that we also need not only good, strong Western science, but we need that capacity to connect with the land, to empathize with other species. And in fact, without it, our Western science, we haven't turned the tide. We haven't turned the tide on climate change. We talk a talk, but the scientific evidence are that, number one, none of the Aichi targets were achieved globally. That climate change is increasingly an issue. And so it's going to take not only great discipline, it's going to take a change in how we approach solving these problems. And that change is to bring, as Albert Marshall, Mi'kmaq elder from Unama'ki, and his wife Merdina, who taught at Harvard, and they created the Integrated Sciences Department at the University of Cape Breton. They coined the term two-eyed seeing, that we need both eyes, and that if we're going to achieve those goals, those conservation goals, and they're more than conservation goals, they're survival goals. And that's why I read Oren Lyon's quote on natural law. Yeah, to live on this land and to live with respect for our ancestors and respect for future generations. We talk about thinking 7 generations. Actually, we talk about 7 generations both ways. The legacy of our ancestors, but also the responsibility to future generations unborn. And so in order to do that for all of our children, no matter how they identify, we have to bring the kind of knowledge that emerged in Canada's Pathways 1. So I encourage people to take a look at those documents. You can get them electronically. In fact, if you can't find them, feel free to contact me. I'm more than happy to not only share the full documents, but also the pages that I recommend be read. I had a lot more that I wanted to say. I've already, I cut this presentation down by 15 minutes from what I had originally understood, because I want to make sure that there's an opportunity for questions and answers and whatever else the organizers have to do to complete today's seminar. But I want to thank all the sponsors, all of you, all the participants for joining in. And I hope this is just sowing some seeds and will result in a long-term engagement on these kinds of issues. So Chi Miigwech to all of you, and back to the MC. Miigwech.
Yahweh, Larry, appreciate your presentation, and as always, I learned a lot from hearing you talk. I did want to mention a couple things before we send it back to Kevin and the Muskoka Discovery Center team, but just in terms of making commitment to one's values, I think it's important to understand that Larry lives completely off the grid in a 170 plus year old log home surrounded by 500 acres of biologically diverse Algonquin land along Ontario's Mississippi River. So when Larry talks about sustainability, I think it's really important for people to understand that he actually lives it and commits to those values, and works towards supplying the practical solutions that it takes to actually meet those obligations as an Indigenous person. And then the second thing I just wanted to mention, because it's important in relation to the exhibition, is that Plenty Canada has provided in-kind support to us in phase 1 and now into phase 2 in way of providing some administrative support to And at this point, I'll turn it back to Kevin.
Thanks very much for that perfect segue, Tim. That information helps sort of tie things together. So we have a number of questions here, Larry, in the chat, and I'll just start at the top and I'll work my way down. So I think this is there'll be some for Larry and there'll be some for Tim. So maybe we'll try to jump back and forth. So Tim, if you hear your name, just throw your video back on, and we'll start with Larry. So this is, can you comment more on ceremonies and how they connect us all to the land? Non-Indigenous folks have little appreciation of this. From your experiences, do you have any advice on how to increase the non-Indigenous appreciation of this?
Wow. I'm going to try to do the short version, but it's going to be tough. Yeah, I'm immediately thinking of Haudenosaunee friend, International Joint Commissioner Henry Lickers, and I were meant to present Haudenosaunee and Anishinaabeg views on forestry at a sugar camp in South Nation Conservation area. And Henry said, first of all, things like the words before all else, the idea of expressing your gratitude, thinking about all of nature around you, being observant, connecting, and taking that time. Well, that's ceremony. Just finding ways to express our gratitude. And it really struck me. And he said, you can use some of our ways of knowing if that helps you. Everybody's in Henry's perspective, and by the way, William commanded us out the same way. Everybody has Indigenous roots. We're all Indigenous from somewhere, and so. But in coming to this land, there are ceremonies that can be shared. There are others that require a long period of time to be able to understand and develop, and to express, and there are special people that do that. But there are ways, and I think one of the simplest way, I know in my concluding remarks with leading climate change scholars at the Museum of Natural History on Manhattan Island, we were asked to say a sentence or two, and I stood during a break by this beautiful oak tree here in the middle of Manhattan Island. And I had walked by Tecumseh Park. Anyway, I put my tobacco down and just reflected on what I might say. And what I said was, when the world learns to practice reciprocity and gratitude, the door will be open on how to sustain ourselves in an appropriate way. And I truly believe that and I see that as ceremony. There's more to this answer, but I think to the person that's asking that question, feel free to contact me. I'd be happy to elaborate on some of the experiences of particularly the National Advisory Panel participants. But I think we probably should move on to another question.
Yeah, and you might be opening up for a lot of emails there. So I'll make sure we get your okay before we put your contact information in the chat. But certainly we'll put in information about Plenty Canada there. So that's great. Moving on, next question. So I think from Andrew Watson, this one I think is for Tim. I think very few people who live in or visit Muskoka know anything about First Nations who call Muskoka home. Will the exhibits include information about these communities and their history? The Muskoking, Moose Deer Point. I apologize for pronunciation. Larry, I already did this to you once. The Mingnaking and Georgina Island, Bay Soleil, and Wata. I do apologize for my pronunciation.
That's pretty close.
Well, the answer is yes. The way we structured the group that's producing the exhibition is we have a core curatorial team that's deeply experienced in exhibition development. Again, and most of the folks in that core team are Indigenous peoples themselves. And then we've created a circle of Indigenous advisors from the communities, so we can get from them their specific histories and learn from them what are the most important stories to tell. Curatorially, we know that we have to make sure that all of this comes together properly so it's understandable by the visitor. That's partly our role. And then for our advisors, it's really to help inform us about what are the important aspects of their history that they want to have in the exhibition. And then we also have a collective goal as a group, which is to arrive at these common understandings around issues of sustainability and what messages do we want to leave at the end of the exhibition for the visiting public. So yes, we're working very diligently at ensuring we have all of these community voices involved.
That's crucial. That's excellent. And next one for Larry, and I know you mentioned the grandma and grandpa rules or gifts earlier, along with a ton of information in your presentation, but I think this sort of relates to that maybe. This is from anonymous attendee. In Braiding Sweetgrass, Robin Will Kilmer emphasizes that Indigenous knowledge sees the environment as gifts, grandmother teachings, while settler culture views the environment as a collection of commodities. How can we bring the sense of gratitude to the modern society? For you, Larry.
Yeah, critically important. That transition has to happen. To look at a living tree and see board feet and see dollars only has got us into trouble. So we don't know when to put the brakes on. That's how we violate natural law. So that's why there has to be a process of developing empathy. So the guy with, in fact, I actually wince. The more technology you have, the more you separate yourself from that life that you're taking, the more distance we get, the more disconnected we get from nature. So we really have to evaluate, and I believe, and COVID, I believe, has given us this opportunity to reassess our economic paradigm, our way of living on the land, and making sure that we actually have an economic balance that weighs, financial survival, yeah, but puts a premium and a value on empathizing, respecting, appreciating, and providing appropriate reciprocity for the life that we take.
That's a great
I-
answer.
I have something I can add here as well. If I
Yes,
could,
certainly.
Yeah, going back several years, we had brought Robin into the Smithsonian Institution as well to sit on a panel where we were talking about environmental issues. And her book was kind of out early at that time. And as Larry mentioned, went on to become a bestseller on the bestsellers list for the New York Times. But one of the chapters that really has resonated with me in that book is the one where she talks about the structure and intent of her Potawatomi language, where in the language, animate objects are those that come from nature. Inanimate objects are those that humans build and create. So you're separating natural law, the natural world, from this human-induced reality. And in that context, how you think about these things becomes embedded in the philosophy. So that's part of the culture, is actually baked into the language. And I was always very impressed by her insights in that respect.
Those are great responses. And Larry, before I get too far and I forget, maybe in the chat we'll put a link to Plenty Canada. Is there a way that people can support Plenty Canada?
Oh, most certainly. Yeah. So I'm going to recommend our website, which is the usual www.plentycanada.com. And there are mechanisms to donate there. You would find our address there, which is 345 Plenty Lane, Lanark, Lanark, Ontario, and the postal code is K0G1K0. So some people prefer to mail a check, but there are lots of ways. Canada Helps is another mechanism. We certainly appreciate the support that we get. It makes a huge difference. And geez, I wish we had more time to talk about the things we're doing. Tim's involved in those activities as well, including Land-Based Learner Center and Tim came up with the name Campus. So it's a play. Camp is important in Indigenous culture. And so it's with a capital C and a capital U, which is about looking at two-eyed seeing, learning from the land. And we're tied in with a number of universities over a wide, we cover a lot of geography in Ontario through those partnerships. So happy, a lot of information on the website. Tim and Amanda have done a great job in working on it. It's vastly improved recently.
And I do see that Jordan, who's worked diligently behind the scenes here to support us, is putting some of those links in the chat box there. So thanks for that, Larry, and thank you very much for your time. I wanted to make sure we got that before we got too far into questions.
Yeah.
So this one, another question for you. Oh,
Are you looking at
sorry.
Brian Preston's?
Yes.
Yeah.
I can read it for people, or
Okay.
Yeah.
Sure.
Larry, principles of the Proclamation of 1763 are clear to Indigenous and the newcomers, I will call settlers. But today we have a situation where the Indigenous are many separate nations with different voices and goals, while the settlers have created a system of the Indian Act policies and systems that remain fractured in dealing with our Indigenous peoples. Do you see a way forward for reconciliation that the diverse First Nations as well as settlers can ascribe to and walk on the same path? I'm not so sure at this point, but I remain optimistic. Miigwech, thank you, Brian Preston, Portland, Ontario.
Yeah, not too far away from me. Thank you for that question, Brian. Absolutely. So I know our elders and from many nations have either shared prophecies or just their own predictions of where we're going if we don't live according to natural law. And so one way of looking at that is to live in a colonized way. And the process of colonization, the process of disconnecting from the land has affected all of us, Indigenous, non-Indigenous. So the way back is not going to be easy, but I think there are certain principles. And I love the idea of ethical space, of negotiating goals together, of ensuring that there's accommodation. Dr. Reg Croshu at our 3rd anniversary on March 27th said, I'm still seeing too much lip service and not enough accommodation in our relationships. So from an Indigenous perspective, it's important to establish those relationships. Then from there, we have the strength to achieve goals. If we jump ahead to goals before we've negotiated accommodation to ensure that in our relationship, we have a way that will work for the two fundamental cultures, Western and Indigenous. So that's critical, but it's gonna take a lot of work. Obviously, there's an urgency. Western science provides us with quick indicators of where we're at, and we know we're losing biodiversity rapidly. We know our path when it comes to climate change is not where it needs to be. So together we need to negotiate a way forward that, as I mentioned earlier, respects the future for all of our children. That should motivate us, certainly collectively. But it's going to be a journey, and I agree. Brian, great question. It's going to be hard work for all of us.
Great answer. Thanks very much, Larry. And I know that I did see a comment there from Ian and Wendy Brown. We're going to try to get a list of all the resources from our different talks together, and we'll see how we can share those through the Steamship Discovery Center, because in all of our talks, there's so much great resources. And I know we've got a couple questions lined up here for you here, Larry, but we'll make sure we don't take too much time. Where can we get the little TRC booklet you mentioned? That had all that great information, but was a tiny little convenient package.
Yeah. Okay.
I'll have our tech guy, Jordan, do a little bit of background research on the fly, and I am totally putting on the spot. So there you go, Jordan, to see if you can dig that up as well.
Yeah. Well, I have the address that
Perfect.
I can barely see. Old eyes. It's I know the National Center, just Google National Center for Truth and Reconciliation, and you'll find a way to order these.
I know that the information like that in really sort of easy to read packages is great, because I need more knowledge myself. I have much to learn. So thanks for that.
Yeah, it's a great booklet.
So from Ron Beath, Larry, so much planning and discussion has taken place over the past 250 years, but it seems the executable actions have not happened. What has held back more specific actions?
Well, I
Tough
mean,
question.
the planning and discussion in the past 250 years was not based on inclusivity. It was based on hierarchy. It was based on a superiority of one culture over the other. We're only beginning, in the last, I don't know. When I think of Jules Seawee and William Commander, Jules Seawee fasted nearly to the death for going to the League of Nations and later the UN to ask for a seat for Indigenous nations, the United Indian Nations of North America. And that was considered treasonous, and Indigenous peoples weren't allowed to hire lawyers. In our history, you had to get a pass to go off the reservation. So that doesn't make for much effective planning and discussion that's anywhere remotely close to two-eyed seeing. So I see us coming out of the dark ages, and I'm optimistic that the strength of those ways of knowing brought forward in ethical space through respect. I think we can. I'm optimistic. I see no other way, and we're going to have to make some tough individual decisions. We just, we know what we need to do, but we need to do it.
No, I think that's great. Next question, I actually have a personal interest too. Larry, how fulfilling has living off the grid been for you?
I love it. It's been way better than I expect. For one thing, it tunes you into the sun cycle. So I pay attention to the weather. I thought I always did. I thought I was really tuned in, way more tuned in. And I see those solar panels. I see the sun, I see those rays bouncing off of them. And it just makes our whole family, we all talk about it, makes us feel really good. And we used to have power outages here. We're out in a rural area and the grid's a little shaky. And I had, I reflect on circumstances where we had no power for 4 days in the middle of the winter. And it literally nearly killed me one time. And now we've had none of that. No power interruptions. We don't even know the power's off until our neighbors text us and say, whoa, that was awful. We didn't have, how did you guys make out? Well, just fine. We didn't even know there was a problem. To have control over power sources, to know that I'm not damming rivers and interfering with species migration. I worked on the American eel recovery strategy, and they swim 5,000 kilometers to the Sargasso Sea once upon a very important species, but just to not be part of that anymore, not be part of fossil fuel consumption for electric production, or including coal. That amazes me in 2021 that we'd even think that was remotely that was a good idea. And other power sources where we haven't really figured out how to handle the waste. Yeah, no one source is absolutely perfect, but I sure, you look at the International Energy Agency, you look at what the world is doing, they are very quickly going into renewables. They're cheaper. We subsidize energy sources that are killing us, and then we don't provide subsidies for energy sources that will help us. So to take that on as a family, to commit our resources to making it happen, has been more gratifying than I ever would have imagined. I encourage others to do it. We're doing it completely here at Plenty Canada. We're going to have 3 different microfit, net metering, and off the grid systems. We'll do adaptive research, and for people that are interested in coming up with a system that's best for them, we'll have some information we're happy to share.
That is great, and close to my heart. It's the goal, I think, for me one day. I think, and I love your idea of bringing it, understanding how you fit in the system better. I think that's really important. But we're getting close to 6:20, so I think maybe we'll take one more, and we'll turn it to both you, Larry, as well as to Tim. This one's from Lara LaFontaine. Indigenous perspectives offer so much reverence and appreciation for land and all living things. How can we bring that to local planning tribunals and town councils? I see so much development that removes trees, puts strains on lakes. It's obviously approved by local governments, despite the protests by some groups. So maybe we'll start with who, I'm going to toss it up, but maybe we'll get both your perspectives on this. I think would be a good sort of closer.
We better let Tim go first.
Well, I was gonna pass it over to you, Larry. I mean, 3-time mayor of Lanark Highlands, spent many years on town council working on these kinds of civic challenges. I'd rather you go first on this one.
Well, yeah, I sat on the Ontario Royal Commission for Land Use Planning Reform, and I worked with Indigenous provincial organizations and helped establish the first rural planning committee. And we also brought in leading scientists and set up the first capacity limits around the lake. Very, very difficult. I thought it was logical and simple, but it turned out to be extremely difficult. Well, for one thing, what happens on a lot of municipal councils, developers finance candidates. So the community has to be involved. It has to assert and defend the land. And I see that happening, although a lot of times it happens after the fact. A development comes in, the council's already stacked in favor of development and back to the commodification of nature, and it doesn't have that balance. I also think it's important that there's more women involved. I just see better results when that happens. But you know, we have to be involved, and then you have provincial policy, and there's actually in some cases a strong provincial policy. I, along with Douglas Cardinal, challenged the city of Ottawa, and we didn't even get into the OMB determined that we're irrelevant, essentially. I'm still shocked at that. So I see the system really needs an overhaul. It really does, right at the provincial level. It needs to respond to our responsibilities to the land. And currently, the architecture is flawed, weak, and it's not producing the results, just as Laura has indicated. And that's true coast to coast to coast.
Yeah, and I think the civic guidelines, codes, building codes, and things of this nature remain far behind where the evidence and reality actually is. And this remains a sort of an endemic challenge to everybody. Back in 2007, when I was acting director of the National Museum of the American Indian, we did a co-program with Al Gore when he was developing this global concert to bring awareness around the world to climate change. And so we developed a complementary Mother Earth program that coincided with Al Gore's Live Earth program. And we actually ended up launching that global broadcast, satellite broadcast, from the Welcome Plaza of the National Museum of the American Indian. And our intent, of course, as an Indigenous organization, was to ensure that the Indigenous viewpoint and perspective was applied and inserted into that global conversation. So our cultures, as Larry has mentioned, and this is true among the Haudenosaunee, I mean, the culture is based on Thanksgiving, on observation, recognition, acknowledgement, and Thanksgiving. And if you approach life like that, then I think you're better able to make decisions that are for the benefit of the seventh generation and our culture, the future generations to come, and to find ways to adhere to the information and knowledge that is there. The other thing about Indigenous cultures is they're really practical. If you look at the core cultures, it's around following natural law, right? And so the thing with climate change, Kevin, is this is natural law. You know, that this is physics, it's chemistry. And when you observe and recognize that certain actions are having an impact, an adverse impact, then you change course. That's what you do normally, culturally. So we know now that unfortunately there are a number of impediments, and we know what those are, towards actually behaving and acting in a way that's appropriate to the knowledge and information that's available to all of us. But I think for us, it's relying on all of those cultural values and philosophies that are baked into our ceremonies and all of the teachings that we have.
Well, that is just great, guys. The discussion tonight, the information presented, you know, from the treaties or in 1796 to desertification, to the mixing of knowledges, traditional knowledge, to what's taking place at the Muskoka Steamship Discovery Center, and all the information you provided is just wonderful. I will note that thanks to Randy, there is a link to the booklet in our chat box, as well as a link to Plenty Canada. So gentlemen, thank you very much for your very valued time and all the information you brought together. I know I've got a booklet full of stuff that I need to follow up with now. And for everybody, we will try to put together a big list of all the sources from all of our talks at some point. And maybe just a quick shout out to some of our partner organizations. At the Watershed Council on May 28th at 1 p.m. There's a talk on integrated watershed management, which would be great. And of course, with Climate Action Muskoka, you can still enter their carbon challenge as well through their website. But I wanted to just say what great information and great talks there, guys. So thank you very much. And with that, I will turn it over to John. Thanks, guys.
Thank you, Kevin. Yahweh.
Thanks, Kevin. Yeah, I'm just the same way. I've been taking notes and quotes and just trying to write down quickly, especially, I mean, Larry's presentation was amazing. Larry, thank you very much. And Tim, you as well. I mean, we could have been on here till 9 o'clock easily with the questions we had. And I think, unfortunately, we have to go now. But as Kevin said, we're going to try and post as many of those website links as we can, and maybe answer some of the questions as well after the fact. But I think this was just a wonderful evening. It was a little bit different from the previous four, and it will be different from next week's as well. But again, I'd like to thank Larry and Tim for their participation. That was amazing. And I think I've learned a lot, and I hope everyone, our audience, has learned a lot as well. Actually, we had over 90 people on the call or on the Zoom call tonight. So that's wonderful considering the weather is just beautiful outside. So thank you to our audience for joining us. Kevin, thank you for moderating, and Jordan Waynes and Ann Curley in the background for assisting with the technical issues that we have. Our 6th and last event is next week, a week today, the 27th at 5 p.m. We welcome Dr. Norman Yan to conclude our series. Again, if you'd like to watch this recording, go to our website, realmuskoka.com, and in a couple of days, we'll have this up and ready for you. You can watch it in its entirety. Again, thank you, everyone. Thanks to our presenters, Larry and Tim. Have a good evening, everyone, and stay safe.